Hello and welcome to slide pack 14 of the financial modeling program. What we will do today is talk about Excel formulas, and with that I am now going to go into an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so I just have a little rough spreadsheet that I've put up here to very simply walk you through some of the key formulas that we use in financial modeling. Now I've thrown together some numbers, and next to those numbers I have a couple of formulas. So the one thing I want to start out with is to remind people who haven't used Excel in a while that let's just say you want to add two numbers. What you need to do is tell Excel that you are about to enter into calculation mode, and you do that by using an equal sign. So Excel sort of knows, okay, it's an equal sign, I need to be prepared to do some calculations and some mathematics and stuff like that. Alternately, what you can do is you can use a plus sign, and alternately what you can also do is use a minus sign. So we leave that to you depending on what you want to do. So for example, if I want to sum a few numbers here, I can go in and type, in fact let me actually increase this a little so it's slightly more clear. So what I can go in there and type equals sum if I want to sum numbers, and I'm just going to take my cursor there and hold down the shift key and highlight the number of cells that I want to sum up, and then close parentheses. So that's the sum of the number of the numbers there, the three that we just added up. Alternately, what you can also do is you can just in fact use plus and select the first number, and then you can use plus again, and let's just say you don't want to sum all, but you just want the sum of these two numbers. So you can do a plus C10 plus C12, and that'll give you 1200 plus 1500, which is 2700. So there may be times when you want to sum the entire range, and there may be times when you just want to sum a couple of numbers of the entire range. And so, you know, you have various options in doing that. Now the other thing I also want to show you is you can use sum, and you can actually define separate ranges. So let's just say that is one range, C5 to C8. What I'm going to do is press a comma, and then Excel allows me to take my cursor somewhere else and define another range and close parentheses, and Excel tells me that the sum of those two ranges of numbers is 19,100. So in that, Excel actually offers you a fair amount of flexibility. The other thing is I can, as I've done here, I can use an if trigger. So I'll just show you what I already have here. What it says is, if the value in cell B3 equals 0, only then give me the sum of the numbers in the range C5 to C8, and if not, give me a 0. And so because B3 is 0, what I get here is the sum. So it said if B3 is 0, give me the sum, and if it's not 0, then give me a 0. Now if I change this to something random such as 23, and if you go back to your if statement, which is a conditional formula, it says if B3 equals 0, which it is not. So it's not going to give you the value that we have here. What it's going to give you instead is just the number 0. Now, the other thing that you might want to do is you might want to sort of say, okay, what's the maximum of all of these numbers that we have in this range here? So you say equals max, and then parentheses, you define the range that you want the maximum for, and Excel will tell you that this is the maximum. Alternately, you can do equals min to get the minimum, and in fact I'm just randomly going to select a different range here. and it's going to give you a minimum. What you can also do is you can say, you know what, I want the average. Now here you have to type out the entire word average and Excel, and then again, you know, define the range that you want, and Excel will give you the average within that range. You know, try and sort of be careful when you define your ranges, because if you are finding the average, you want to restrict your ranges to areas that have numbers, not necessarily numbers and, you know, incorrect values or error values or Excel error type cells. So just good judgment. You can try and brute force Excel through a lot of things, but just to keep your models clean, try and make sure that the range that you're defining actually is valid for what you're trying to do here. So those are some examples. Now another thing that I wanted to show you, which I think is actually very cool and very useful, is combining a text statement with a bunch of numbers. So I'll type this out again here for you. We start out with an equals, and then within quotes I type out the balance is, and I give it a space, and I end quote it. So this is the text string that I've entered within quotes, and then I use the ampersand sign, and now Excel can let me float my cursor onto a number, and then when I press enter, it says the balance is 3,000. Now if I go in there and let's just say I change it, Excel automatically changes that and says the balance is now 1,000. So this is sort of a neat little trick that Excel lets you do, where you combine text and numbers. Now a few other nice functions. Excel has something called the AND function. What the AND function says is essentially, I will give you a number of logical decisions that you have to make, and if all of those logical pieces are true, only then tell me that everything is true. If even one of those is false, then return a false value. So the AND, logical condition 1, logical condition 2, logical condition 3, 4, 5, all of the logical conditions must be true to return a true value. If even one of those logical conditions is not true, then the AND does not apply. So what the AND basically says is, AND true, 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 then give me a true. If it's AND true, false, true, then not all of them are true, so give me a false. Likewise, you have the OR function. So the OR function says, you know, if any one of the conditions within the parentheses of the OR function is true, then return a true value. So let me just try and explain this here. Let's just say equals OR this is less than 5,000, which we clearly know it's not. And in fact, I'm missing a parenthesis. I'm just going to stick that in there. Sorry about that. And then our second logical condition is this is greater than 0.01. Now what you see is that the first logical condition is C8 less than 5,000. It is not, so that's a false. But D8 is greater than 1%. So as long as one of the logical conditions is true, the OR returns a true. Now we've covered that. Let's just talk about another one. There's a choose function. Now what you can see I've done here is I've said equals choose, and then I've taken it to J3, which is just a number. You know, it can be any number. And then I've given it a series of text values, or I can also give it numerical values. But what I've said is choose based on whether J3 is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. orderly from left to right. So if it's 1, then choose apple. If it's 2, choose orange. If it's 3, choose banana. If it's 4, choose grapes. So choose is another function that you will find useful from time to time. Okay, now let's see, we've covered the average, we've covered choose. Now what I plan to do is, now here is another, in fact I'm going to clear this up a little, and I'm going to show you something that I think is a very useful function. Now if you look at the $1,000 and you multiply that by 10%, so equal sign C5, and then this asterisk is the multiplier equivalent arithmetically in Excel, times D5. Now okay, now that actually in fact I'm glad this gave me a percentage. So what we are essentially looking for is 10% of 1,000. Now 10% of 1,000, as we all likely know, is $100. So what we are looking for here is a number in dollars, but then the cell was somehow preset to be a percentage cell. So what I want to do is I want to go in there and stick in dollars, and once Excel recognizes that you actually want your answer in dollars, then it does give you the right answer. So we've got this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this down, and there are different ways of copying it down. You can either select the corner and drag it down, or if you're more of a keyboard person like I am, you can go Control C and you can just sort of highlight the area that you want to copy it to and take it down. Now, so you've got 100, you've got 5% of 4,000 is 200, 5% of 2,000 is 100, and 1.5% of 6,000 is 90. And then you say, okay, that's cool. Let's just say that's interest that you were earning on some of your bank accounts. And then you add all that up and you say, okay, fantastic. Now 490 is the total interest that I get. Alternately, you can use a very cool function. It's called, in fact, let me do it here. It's called the sum product function. So what this basically does is it sums up the values in one array with corresponding values in the next array. So what this does is it's going to multiply C5 times D5, C6 times D6, and so on, and then add them up. And there you see. So as opposed to having these multiple calculations, what I've gotten is just one little formula, the sum product formula, that does it all for me and gives me the same 490 as a return. So that was that. Now there are other very interesting Excel functions, and what I'm going to do here is show some of them to you. There's the count function. So if you want to count how many cells in here in a given range have something that's a number of value, and let me just repeat that. So the count function essentially goes through a range and tells you that in that range of cells that it's gone through, how many of those cells actually had numbers. So what we see here is that of all of these, only 7 of the cells had real numbers in them. Let's just try it differently. If I go in here and I sort of, have all these cells and I say count. So it says, listen, you had a whole bunch of blank cells, but only in 4 cells did you actually have 4 valid number percentage values. Now, what if I go here and say, okay, give me a count, and I'm going to highlight my range as this. Excel says, sorry, 0. You have no numbers in this range you selected, which is true. There are text statements, but there are no numbers here. Now, alternately, if you want to count text and numbers, if you just go in and say count A, where the A I think stands for all, then it's going to tell you, oh, okay. If you include numbers and text, then you had 4 values in this range. So the count is for numbers only, but the count all, or the count A, is for everything including text. Now, continuing on, what I'm now going to do is actually just use Excel's help feature. So, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I want you to get into the practice of getting comfortable with using Excel's help features whenever you're in doubt about a formula. So a few other formulas that we use in our financial calculations and our financial modeling, one of them is VLOOKUP. So when you go into that help box and type in VLOOKUP, Excel's going to try and do some searching within its help system, and it'll first try and look for an internet connection, and if it has an internet connection, it'll get that information for you from the connection. If it doesn't, such as at this point in time, I do not have an internet connection. So the VLOOKUP function, in fact, let's just give it about 5 seconds and see if the VLOOKUP function is in Excel's database that's stored on my computer. And luckily for me, it actually is there. So let's now click on VLOOKUP, and it's called a worksheet function. And then without going into the details, we'll just walk through an example and explain what this VLOOKUP function is. Now, if you look at everything here, and if you look at the thing that says equals VLOOKUP, and then there's basically a value, and the value is 1. So what the formula says is look up anything that's closest to the value of 1, and the range in which I want you to look for this value of 1, I've defined as A2 to C10. So what they've done is they've defined a very broad range. And then the comma, after that it says, and then whenever you find a match for whatever's closest to the number 1, which just happens to be what they've put in this example, from the range I've selected, in the second column of the range, give me the value that matches. So what happens here is 0.946 is the closest value to the number 1, which is in row 8 here. So Excel says, okay, I've looked it up vertically, the V stands for vertical, and the value is 0.946, and you want me to actually tell you what's in the column next to it in the same row. So the column next to it, which is column 2, the density column here is column 1, column B is column 2. So it says 0.946, so the value closest to it is 2.17, and as you can see there, Excel returns a value of 2.17. So this is an example of the VLOOKUP function. Just like the VLOOKUP function, there's a HLOOKUP function. The only difference is that the HLOOKUP, while the VLOOKUP goes down vertically through the rows, the HLOOKUP goes across horizontally through the columns, but it basically does the same thing. So that's the VLOOKUP and the HLOOKUP. Now there's another function that's called the date function. So again, if we type in the date function, so it appears that the date function is probably not in my help right now, so that's okay. We'll go around that, and what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna type in 1/3/2011. Now that's a date. Now if I go in here and I say equals date, now when I enter the formula for a function, then Excel sort of stops and says, okay, what you have to do is you've got to give me the year. So if I say, okay, the year is 2011, it says give me the month, and I'm going to say the month is, let's just say 3, and or in this case, let's say it's January, and the day is 3, and I press an enter. So Excel basically gives you the date. So what sometimes happens is you've got year data somewhere, you've got date data somewhere, day data somewhere, month data somewhere. You can use the date function to combine all of these different things into one unique date. So the date function is a good function to know. Likewise, you've got the month function and the day function, but I want to keep these two modules sort of short. I've split them up into two. So what I'm going to do is stop here today and let you just sort of digest this, and then what we will do in the next slide pack is we will continue with some more Excel financial models, and that hopefully will give you a fairly comprehensive functions tool set for your financial modeling going forward. Thank you very much.